Dalton, the last time we talked, I think it was a year ago, and we were in the depths of COVID despair. Things are looking a bit brighter now. We have the digital COVID cert since last Monday. What's the mood like at the airport? I suppose Dublin in particular.
Well, and look, it's definitely starting to look a lot more positive and a very exciting week, and definitely a buzz around the place. Ireland very much open for business, and I think we have missed we've missed the interaction. And actually, one of the most challenging things has been to be in a terminal that's just devoid of any sense of noise. I think I said to you last time we were going to start pumping Spotify through the terminals just to take that deafening silence out. So look, there's a buzz around the place, and just great to see people reconnecting with family and friends along the way, and some really moving stories, as you would imagine. In fact, the media's been picking up a lot of them of people who've haven't seen family, and in some cases in some very distressing situation, and now being reconnected. Clearly, from our point of view, it's the focus has been around getting ready for the 19th of July. We did a lot of work last year for what we thought was day zero, July 2020, how naive we all were. But the 19th of July was the point we were aiming at, and in terms of just having the airports tip top and ready to go in terms of safety and sanitization. I don't know if you've been out here recently. There's 1,000 sanitization units at the airport. We've got about 1,000 different plexiglass screens around the place so that people can feel very protected if they're check-in or going through security, etc. There's 12,000 signs across the airport with different sort of communication points and lots of PA announcements, etc., etc. So look, the operation opened well on Monday, and in terms of security, which is one area we're obviously very focused on, and ensuring that people could get through and present, because people were presenting earlier, but security, we had no issues at all.
Because there's lots of complexities there, isn't there, in terms of social distancing at security must be a challenge. Even the presentation of the digital COVID cert and verifying that, has the whole process of going to the airport, checking in, going through security, boarding your flight, is that a much slower process, or has it worked fairly effectively?
Well, it is a slower process because there are more steps along the way. It's also a slower process because of the social distancing. And so we are advising people to really be cognizant of the airline advice in terms of different airlines have different cutoff times, but really people should be getting to the airport 2 hours before. I think the other thing, Owen, that's unusual is that many people haven't traveled for at least 2 years.
Absolutely.
And so what was a familiar journey is a less familiar journey now. And I think that's all taking a little bit more time. But in terms of the actual process, as I said, security been working really well this week. The team have done an outstanding job. The other area that we were all concerned about, your members would be very focused on as well, is the whole immigration process. So coming in, and we heard about Heathrow in 10 hours. Actually, this week, on Monday, which was our key start day, the average time was about 14 minutes to get through for an EU passport holder, and the longest wait time for an EU passport holder was 19 minutes. So border management unit doing a super job there as well. So look, we're off to a very good start. The numbers are up 95% on the previous week. So that's very encouraging. But the reality is, we're still at 80%, we're 80% down on what we were in 2019. There's a long road back.
And can you see over the coming months that there's a lift in air capacity? Are you able to see that in your planning schedules?
So the capacity was increased in May for the summer period, and it hasn't increased again. So what we haven't seen in the last 10 days is a further increase in capacity. The airlines, as I said, we're at 36 airlines now. So we've been building. At our low point last year, we were at 7 airlines serving 20 destinations. So it's been building bit by bit. And as I said, we're up to 36 now. And then we've got, and that's essentially where we sit now for the rest of the summer. There's quite a lot of capacity in there. There's about 65% on average of the 2019 capacity, but the load factors jumped 14%, but they're only at 54, but they're only at 54%.
Yes,
so you can see why there's not a huge rush to put even more capacity in when you've got load factors of 54%.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, I often say tourism has been disproportionately impacted by COVID, but of course, aviation has been utterly blitzed by COVID. Are you able to put an economic cost estimate on the impact of the pandemic on DAA over the last 16 months? Is it possible, or even is it something you barely want to consider because it's been devastating?
Well, look, it's very clear, and we spent most of last year losing €1 million a day, and in fact our total losses last year were €284 million. So and we'd made 150 million the previous year. So I mean, you're talking about enormous swings there. That's a 450 million odd swing year on year. So it's catastrophic, and there's no doubt about it. And we continue to lose 700 odd thousand euros every single day at the moment. And I think, look, we have to carry our own water. We are fortunate, like other businesses across the country, that have availed of TWSS or EWSS as it was in the beginning. The PUP has obviously been out there for staff members in certain situations. And we've had rates relief, but the fact is we don't get anything else, and we're a fully commercial organization. So we've had to increase our debt. Our debt's doubled over a year, nearly at 1 billion now. We had to borrow €1 billion. And all of this, Owen, has to be paid back. And that we need to understand, and the regulation needs to keep up with that.
Was it difficult to go to the market to borrow that extra money, or was DAA seen as a very sure bet, for the future? I mean, how did I don't know whether they're bond markets or debt markets. I don't quite know how it works, but how do they look at an airport in the middle of a pandemic and decide to lend money to it?
Well, we borrowed. We went out to the market last year, and we borrowed 500 million was from the bond market. So 350 million was from EIB, and 150 was from our banks. But if you talk about the bond market, I mean, on one side we were able to get it away, so it was oversubscribed. So that's good news. I think that's resting very much on our historic accomplishments as an organization, which we've been managing our balance sheet very prudently over the years. So you're going back out, you're going out to the market in that context, but we're going to have to deliver on our financials now. And one of our challenges is really around the economic regulation, which is we don't set the pricing at Dublin Airport. That is set by the economic regulator. And therefore, our charges are significantly lower than they should be. If you compare us to the rest of Europe, an airport of our size, we're somewhere between 40 and 50% cheaper than any other airport of a comparable size. So there is a challenge here, which is you can't keep selling pound notes at 80p, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to rebuild our balance sheet, and that's where the economic regulator needs to come in and do their legislative role or their statutory role to ensure that we are an economically viable business.
Absolutely. And obviously pre-pandemic, Dublin in particular, we'll talk about Cork in a minute, but Dublin had done so well to become a hub of status between the North American market and Europe effectively. How long do you think it will be before we can get back to that? I mean, you talk about it being an uber competitive world, and the Reykjaviks and the Manchesters and stuff are trying to kind of steal our lunch. And lots of other airports, and we've got to compete with those, and it's vital for Ireland. I mean, from a tourism perspective, obviously, but also from inward investment, from exports, it's vital that we get connectivity, global connectivity, back to 2019 levels as soon as possible. But when I say as soon as possible, that's still going to be a number of years, isn't it?
Look, it is, and ACI, Eurocontrol, IATA, I think most commentators are saying 2023, 2024, some pushing out to 2025. So it's going to take time. I mean, clearly, none of us really know. We were encouraged by what we saw this week, but we have been the laggards across Europe in terms of the Irish aviation, as you know, and your members, and we all have been suffering as a consequence of that. But clearly, we now need to think beyond COVID, and we need to really start that planning. And that's why projects like the North Runway, which essentially short of 1 month in May last year, we have continued to deliver in terms of building that infrastructure, which North Runway, which is our new parallel runway, which opens in August next year. It's not it's clearly a Dublin project, a Dublin Airport project, but it's an Ireland Inc. project, because it's going to allow the capacity to bring in those major airlines from around the world. And clearly, if you have a strong, vibrant hub airport like Dublin, it filters out into the regional airports. So this isn't a Dublin versus the regions, quite the opposite. I think having strong connectivity into Dublin, in fact, increases the possibility to have stronger regional networks as well. So we've got to finish that runway. We started it in 2019. It's amazing to think that in 2019, we began that project, and we will complete it this month. So in 2 and a bit years, we'll have gone from a field to a 3 kilometer long modern runway that's ready to be used. And that connects Ireland to the rest of the world. So projects like that are going to be critical. We're going to have to get ministers on. We're going to have to take an Ireland Inc. approach to this. Ministers, trade bodies, your good selves, ourselves, IDA, Enterprise Ireland. We've got to come together. We've got to get on planes. We've got to get out into these markets. When we put the green shirt on, nobody does it better. And that's why Ireland and Dublin has traditionally boxed above its weight in terms of connectivity. There are large, major cities across Europe that don't have any connectivity pre-COVID to North America, and yet we're serving almost 25 different points in North America. So we got to get back to that.
And Dalton, I remember there was a couple of very kind of punitive restrictions on the new runway that were going to, detrimentally affect flights in and out of the airport. Where are we with that at the moment?
So this is a very significant issue, which is that essentially once the new runway opens in August next year, Dublin Airport will have to reduce its capacity in key hours by 50%. So essentially between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., the maximum number of flights that can come into Dublin will be 65 flights, or 65 movements, versus about 120 today. And when I mean today, I mean pre-COVID. So we're going to have to reduce flights by 50% at key times. Now, that key time is between 11 p.m. and midnight, and between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., which is when the majority of that activity happens as aircraft come in or go out on the first wave. This is a significant issue for Ireland Inc. because it's going to dramatically reduce our connectivity. And we're sleepwalking into a situation where we're going to have massive reduction in capacity at Dublin Airport at a time when Ireland needs increased capacity. And I'm really concerned about it. And we're kind of running out of road now in terms of a solution. So these conditions are invariably going to bite, and I'm really concerned about it.
Yeah, and it has a big impact on tourism from the States in particular, because I'm thinking of those transatlantic flights, which often land early in the morning. But if there's a limit to the number of flights that can be welcomed into Dublin Airport, then there's, as you say, a reduction in transatlantic capacity.
A very significant one. And look, we're not trying to increase the level of nighttime flying per se, but to reduce it by half and prevent those key US customers coming in. And if you think from the Far East, that Hong Kong flight that we used to have, the Shanghai flight that we're opening up, or were opening up pre-COVID, we hope to get it back, obviously. I mean, they come in early morning. But early morning for me, I mean, to say that 6 a.m., between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., you have to massively restrict the number of flights when the rest of Europe is well awake at 6 a.m. It's a real concern for us, Alan.
You were part of the aviation task force last year, along with the airlines and other kind of key stakeholders. There was a number of very strong recommendations. I know there was frustration amongst all of us that those recommendations weren't implemented by government more quickly. But there are still some outstanding recommendations, aren't there? I mean, there is a need for sort of a big support package for the aviation world to ensure that we can start restoring connectivity and getting global links to the world again.
Well, very much so, and we're going to have to prime the pump. And we're in a difficult situation because you've got airlines which are trying to stimulate traffic through lower pricing in terms of tickets. You've got airports which are suffering almost catastrophic losses, and we got to square that circle somewhat. And that's where state support needs to come in. And there needs to be real clarity on the subvention, on where is the subvention going to happen. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the economic regulator and the work they need to do in this. But there definitely needs to be a meeting of minds here in terms of the support, because as we know, all your members know, and the industry knows, that the economic positive spillover from a vibrant aviation sector and tourism sector is just enormous for the country. And we've sort of taken our eye off the ball politically. It hasn't been a focus, but it needs to become a focus now as we rebuild.
Talk to us about Cork for a moment. I mean, it's part of obviously the DAA family. It's also had a harrowing last 16 months. But there's better news there. There's routes being announced, and I know they're doing work as well, aren't they, on their runway over the coming months?
Yeah. So Cork was the fastest growing airport in the state pre the pandemic, doing a terrific job. Very much the number 2 airport in the state in terms of total volume. And had a very aggressive growth plan in place. Like all the regional airports, it suffered significantly. They're on the build back, so they've got 6 airlines operating to 20 routes, so that's encouraging. But even when I talk about the sort of the significant increases in traffic in Dublin this week, Cork is only at about 800 passengers per day at the moment. Yeah. It's going to be a long build back. What we have done is we are so firmly wedded to really having Cork as a major player in this market. We have accelerated some significant investment that we were going to do next year. We brought it forward into this year, and we're going to spend 40 million reconstructing the runway from the 13th of September for 10 weeks. It actually means, Owen, unusually, we're going to close the airport, which probably doesn't seem very intuitive to some, which is why would you close an airport? But what we've said is, look, let's keep it open for the summer. Straight after the summer, well, the key summer period, we'll close it for 10 weeks. We'll do a full reconstruction of that runway, which means next year we're in fighting form to really accelerate the growth. The alternative was to do it next year, and you would have done it at night, and it would have actually restricted the overall airport's capacity because you would have had to shut it at key times. We said, look, better take the pain, 10 weeks, and be ready for next year, because next year is really the critical point for Cork.
Yeah, I think we all agree that, this year, there'll obviously be activity again, which is fantastic, but it's really about getting some sort of stability back into our world, isn't it? Whereas real recovery commences next year, and as you say, it will take some time to scale the heights that we were at, but it's also important to the country as a whole. I imagine when you took the role, Dalton, you never imagined that 18 months of your life would be spent sort of dealing with a global pandemic and empty terminals.
No, I mean, none of us could have ever foreseen this. I mean, interesting enough, it was on many of our risk registers, a pandemic, but it was high impact, low likelihood. and also, of course, to what level can you influence it? I think it's been a tremendous learning, though, for all of us across the sector. And I think it's been very stimulating and interesting work in terms of trying to navigate through that. And I'm sure I speak for everybody who's watching this. We've all had our learning periods. We've all had our emotional ups and downs. It's been a difficult period because our sector has had to say goodbye to so many people. I mean, we've said goodbye to a third of our staff, and I'm sure in many cases, many of your members have had to say goodbye to a lot more than a third. And it's a huge loss of intellectual capital out of the industry, and it's going to take time to build back. So didn't expect it, but feeling a lot better this week than I was last week.
Great. It's a much more positive conversation than we had previously. At least we started the recovery. Dalton, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.